One of the first humanoid machines or robots ever created and known to us today was the automatic maid of Philo of Byzantium, developed already in the 3rd century before the Common Era in ancient Greece. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary statue, but if thirsty, guests could put an empty cup in the statue's hands, and then gravity would pull the hand down, and with the help of some gear springs and some clever hydraulics, the robo-servant would first pour wine into the cup and then add some water to it, just how the Greek part people liked it.
And while this is super impressive and probably way ahead of anything that I would be able to build, today's robots can do even more useful things. Robots nowadays are not only lifting heavy things in factories or cleaning our kitchen floors, they even found their way into nursing homes where they play games with people or tell them jokes.
Yeah, I'm not sure to what extent this is great or somewhat odd and creepy, but in any case, our topic today is artificial intelligence, or AI for short. What can artificial systems do already? What can't they do yet? Are we already close to building human-like intelligence, or are today's systems nothing more than glorified automatic maids? I am Dimitri Mollo.
And I'm Nicolas Roth. By the Science of Intelligence cluster in Berlin, this is Punching Cards, the podcast about all things intelligent.
It really seems like artificial intelligence is moving extremely fast at the moment. We have robots that can walk and talk. We have cars that can navigate more and more autonomously through traffic. Today's speech systems are so good, we can do our grocery shopping by talking to a grey box in our living room, while language processing systems like GPT-3 can hold up lengthy conversations about sports or even the meaning of life. Computer vision algorithms can search for and detect faces in surveillance footage, or come up with photorealistic faces that actually never existed. They can also create art that sells for hundreds of thousands of euros. This suggests, to a lot of people at least, some experts included, that in a few years we will have artificial systems that will achieve and even surpass human-level intelligence, so the kinds of things that we humans can do.
That is true. On the other hand, promises that human-level artificial intelligence is just around the corner are about as old as the invention of the digital computer in the 1940s. In a lecture back in 1948, the famous John von Neumann was approached by someone in the audience who said that it was impossible for machines to think. His response was, "If you tell me precisely what it is that a machine cannot do, then I can always make a machine which will do just that." And he did have a good point there.
Absolutely. A few years later, in 1950, Alan Turing came up with the well-known Turing test, in which he replaced the question, "Can machines think?" with what he called the imitation game. It goes roughly like this. A human writes questions to two conversation partners. One is a human, and the other is a machine. Of course, the human does not know who is who. If after a given time the interrogator, so this first human, cannot tell which of the two was the actual human answering the questions, it means that the machine has passed the imitation game. And we should accept, therefore, that it has at least some sort of intelligence.
At first sight, that sounds pretty reasonable, which is probably also the reason why this test is still so popular today. But as von Neumann predicted, just 15 years later, Josef Weizenbaum created one of the first chatbots called Eliza, which got pretty close to this task. Already, with a few simple rules, some pattern matching, and a lot of parroting back questions to the user, Weizenbaum himself was surprised by the large number of people who were convinced of Eliza's intelligence and understanding.
Right, so AI systems developed with the Turing test in mind might get good at fooling people, but in terms of real intelligence, this is still quite limited and underwhelming. For example, if you ask Eliza to pour wine in your glass, or anything else really, should not be able to do it.
Anyways, success stories like these have made AI approaches that rely on rules and logic very popular. Like in Eliza's case, which works a bit like this. If the word
mother
appears, then reply with,
"Tell me more about your mother."
And hundreds of other rules. Or if no words are recognized, then reply with,
"Tell me more,"
or
"Fascinating." Now this is what we call good old-fashioned AI, since it eventually got out of style. As predicted by philosophers like Hubert Dreyfus already in the 60s, it became more and more obvious that implementing just more and more rules would only be suitable for rather simple problems, but is not enough to deal with the complexity of the real world.
realizations about the limitations of a previously hyped approach to create AI led to what we are now calling AI winters. These are periods of disappointment and criticism, both in the scientific community as well as in the general public, accompanied by funding cuts and less research and interest in AI.
Right now, however, as I suppose most of you have noticed, we live in a time that many call AI spring. This started about 10 years ago, mainly thanks to a node idea: machine learning with artificial neural networks.
That's right. Already in 1958, psychologist Frank Rosenblatt invented the artificial neural network, which was inspired by recent findings on how information is processed in the brain. The basic idea is, if you have a complicated problem, instead of trying to come up with a full solution in advance, like these if-then rules, create a big group of simple little computers that only perform very simple calculations. These are then called neurons. Connect them together and let this network learn. That is, first give it inputs where you already know what the right answer of the network should be. Then tweak the connections between the neurons little by little until, collectively, they give you the right answer. It's a bit like replacing a central, powerful problem solver with lots of rules inside, with many dumb, changeable little units, which, when all put together, end up performing a very complex computation.
For these networks to solve interesting problems, though, you need a huge number of those little units, and you also need lots of stimuli, lots of data, to make them learn how to solve a problem, like, say, recognizing a face, translating a sentence to another language, and so on. When neural networks were first developed, the available computational resources were too limited to make that approach really get off the ground. More progress was made in the 80s, when there was another AI spring of neural networks. But it took until 2012, so 10 years ago exactly, for us to see what they are really capable of. Finally, the computers were powerful enough, and there were enough labeled images available, such that Alex Krizhevsky, under the supervision of Geoffrey Hinton, could actually train a powerful neural network that was better at detecting and categorizing objects in images than any program before. After that, nobody could seriously deny the enormous potential of neural networks.
And we've seen that their applications are not limited to computer vision. Big networks of artificial neurons, organized in a large number of hierarchical layers, which we call deep learning, are the powerhouses behind most of the recent success stories in AI, from beating the world champions in board games like Go to increasingly autonomous cars. But are we really getting closer to real intelligence, like ours or that of other animals? Did we get it right this time, with these huge deep neural networks? Or is a new AI winter just right around the corner? We will be back with more about these and other questions after the break. Welcome back to Punching Cards. We are joined by Olga, who talked to two experts in artificial intelligence. Olga, so good to have you.
It's great to be here.
When you were conducting interviews for our first episode on human intelligence, the main question was, how intelligent is that human and how can we measure it? How was it different this time?
Well, when talking about human or animal intelligence, we're usually on the same page, that there is at least some intelligence there. But with AI system, this is not that clear. As much as I'd like to have one of these automatic maids in my living room, I wouldn't say it's very intelligent.
But doesn't that make it hard to draw a line? If robots carry out tasks that are more and more complex, shouldn't we at some point acknowledge that machines can also be intelligent?
That's tricky indeed. Fortunately, we had the great pleasure to talk with Lisa Miracchi.
My name is Lisa Miracchi, and I'm an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania. I work in philosophy of mind and cognitive science, and also epistemology, with a focus on specifically artificial intelligence and robotics research.
She offers a nice explanation on why we intuitively might say that an animal is intelligent when doing a particular task, while we won't say the same for a machine.
What sets genuinely intelligent systems like humans, but also dogs and squirrels and so on, lots of the animal kingdom, what sets intelligent systems apart from ones that aren't genuinely intelligent is that the intelligent systems meaningfully engage with the world. They have their own purposes, and they engage with the world with their own purposes and interests, and that kind of engagement involves what I want to call a kind of practical understanding of the world around them. So they engage with things in the world as targets, as possible predators, as objects of interest even. I think interest and curiosity is fundamental to intelligence. So this capacity to meaningfully engage is something that I think all intelligent systems have, and that we haven't quite figured out how to build AI systems that have that kind of meaningful engagement with the world.
That makes sense. And maybe we don't even want most of our future robots to become too creative after all. But even if we are not there yet, there have been many AI milestones celebrated in the media over the last few years. One example is AlphaGo, developed by Google's DeepMind, mastering the ancient board game of Go, a game that has fairly simple rules, but also has a huge number of possible moves and therefore requires extremely complex strategies. In 2016, AlphaGo won against Lee Sedol, who is widely considered to be the greatest Go player of the past decade. And since then, AlphaGo has only gotten stronger.
Right, but when talking about superhuman achievements, for example in board games, there is often a misconception.
Just because it requires intelligence for a human to play these games doesn't mean that it requires intelligence for an AI system to play these games. However, the advances are super cool. I think the impressiveness of these sort of systems like AlphaGo and so on, they're impressive in their own right. And then I think what's theoretically exciting about the way in which they're built is this kind of pragmatism about trying to get a system that works and loosening up our preconceptions about what kinds of representations might do the job.
With the last point, Lise is referring to the shift that happened in AI research from good old-fashioned AI, where the engineers already predefine possible actions in the form of if-then rules, as you mentioned in the ELIZA example, to the machine learning approach, where the AI system is only given a goal but needs to find its own way to getting there. And she's not alone in celebrating such shifts.
I think the real achievements are when we break through a preconceived notion. So in the beginning, when the term AI was coined, we thought it was symbol processing. And giving up that constraint and broadening our perspective and saying, maybe it's neural networks, maybe it's something completely different. I think that, it's almost like dropping something is an achievement.
This was Oliver Brock.
Yeah, my name is Oliver Brock, and I'm a roboticist. I think a roboticist who thinks that robotics is the discipline that studies intelligent behavior.
He's a professor at TU Berlin and also the spokesperson of our Excellence Cluster, Science of Intelligence. He holds similar views on recent development as Lisa does.
Why is chess in the first place a game that we consider the pinnacle of intelligence? It's because it's super difficult for us. Why is it super difficult for us? Because it's a very, very simple, in terms of its structure, search problem. It just has such a huge, expansive, vast search space. So humans have respect for this game because we're actually, we're like the opposite. We're not built to play chess at all. Now, the fact that we have only discovered a small set of the strategies that are relevant to chess or Go, to me is like, that's obvious. I mean, how could we ever have expected to do something else? And so the contribution in chess and Go is one of being able to search these vast game trees for good strategies more efficiently than ever before. And that is a consequence of computation, with which we have vastly more than ever before. It's a consequence of also ingenious engineering ideas, but in principle, it is just, I'm making little quotes on both sides, right? It's just search.
Right, and on top of that, this system was only ever trained to play this very board game, while humans do a lot of other stuff and then decide to play this game out of interest, boredom or curiosity. And we're still far away from having AI systems with such attributes.
Just because you call something a goal doesn't mean that the system has goals. Just because you call some sort of representation knowledge, or you call some sort of process decision-making, doesn't mean that the system actually has knowledge or makes decisions in anything like the way that intelligent systems do.
It makes sense to be a bit more cautious with our language here. But how do we even decide between wanting to do something or being programmed to do something? Aren't they fundamentally the same thing?
Not quite. Lisa has a nice distinction for that.
Some people make the distinction between biological agency and psychological agency. And I like this distinction. So I think it's very useful to attribute biological drives to systems like bacteria and so on in order to understand their behavior. But that doesn't entail that they have psychological agency, that the agent itself has its own goals and interests and purposes. And even for systems that do have those psychological agency, that can come apart from their biological drives, right? So we often thwart our own biological drives in a variety of different ways. One common example is contraception, right? That an intelligent human might choose to take contraception as a means of thwarting a biological drive. So we would attribute the intention not to get pregnant as the psychological intention, even though we might attribute some sort of biological intention to get pregnant. So I am aligning the term intelligence with this notion of psychological agency.
Fair enough. So coming back to board games, it is then not enough for a computer program to beat a human at some task. I mean, a pocket calculator might be superhuman when multiplying large numbers, but nobody would say that just multiplying numbers is a good test for intelligence. This is just not what humans evolved for. We have other qualities, though.
It is probably the most underappreciated insight in AI of what's called Moravec's paradox. And Hans Moravec was an Austrian researcher at MIT who was one of the founding fathers of AI. Basically, he, Rod Brooks, and a couple of other, of these early pioneers quickly realized that playing chess and doing these things that humans consider intellectually super challenging are actually easy for a computer. And that those things that we do without even noticing, which is, just as you said, recognizing our kid in the playground, processing speech, talking to each other, understanding humor, running away from tiger, all of these things, that's actually super difficult to do in machines. And so I think one of the problems of artificial intelligence is that it's always judged by humans and not always by humans that are researchers in this area. If you are intelligent, you should be able to learn how to play chess. And if you're very intelligent, maybe you, and spend a lot of time, you could even learn how to play chess well. But the inversion of saying, I now have created an artifact, a computer or whatever, right? Some program that plays chess and therefore it's intelligent, that just doesn't work.
Interesting. And Lisa makes similar observations.
We're building highly specialized systems that perform very well, often in simulated or very highly constrained environments. What we haven't been able to do is leverage those advances to build systems that are robust and effective in the real world.
The robustness in the real world is precisely what Oliver and his team are trying to achieve.
So let's talk about holding an object in your hand and kind of rotating it so that you can look at all sides, right? That's clearly a physical process. Interacting with the world, this might be useful if you found a fruit to inspect if it is spoiled, to see how you can open maybe the shell and so on, right? So this is a survival skill. I would say that this includes all aspects of intelligence in the sense that you need to know what's important in order to be able to do this robustly, because we can do this if the object is wet or slippery. We can do it if it's round or square, if it's heavy or light, if it's out of paper or out of steel, and we just intuitively do the right thing. And I think that's a form of intelligence. So people have tried to address this problem from the perspective of computation and simulation, and have created simulations of a hand with objects in it. And in order to make sure that the output of that simulation, whatever the computer program learned from living in this simulated world has a chance of transferring to a real robot, to a real hand and a real object. People do something that's called domain randomization, which is just randomly varying the appearance and the physical properties of the world. You change the colors of things so that your vision system gets challenged. And then you just hope that the real world will look like one of those simulations. And that works. People have done this. It has taken huge teams, millions of dollars of compute equipment. But it's not something that actually generalizes super well. If you take the embodied approach, which is what we've done in our lab, and you try to create a hand that's good at doing these things, we've shown that the computation required to achieve this is actually completely minimal. It's a trivial problem. So the availability of simulation, and this one example, has led, in my view, people to dig out 20 sledgehammers to solve a problem that is really a mosquito.
So making some clever choices in the design of the hand, for example, how the fingers move together, inspired by the human hand, makes it much easier to solve this problem.
Right, but it's not only easier. Such design choices, Oliver calls them inductive biases, often lead to even better or more robust results. And even though it might sound counterintuitive, it might be that exactly such restricting of the capabilities of AI system will lead us to actual intelligence.
My feeling is that with the computation we have, with the algorithms we have, with the search algorithms, with reinforcement learning, all the machine learning algorithms, deep learning, we have an incredibly powerful set of tools. So I would suspect that using those tools, if we knew how to do it, we could produce intelligence. It might be that advancing the set of tools, developing intelligence, will become easier for us given that we don't know how to do it right now. But somehow I feel that the tools that we have right now are sufficient in principle, but for us to understand how to use them in such a way, we might have to develop other tools along the way. So what if then maybe the next question could be, well, if that's the case, why haven't we discovered, why haven't we done it yet? And I think it's because there's a really important component missing that I would consider also tools. Mm-hmm. And that is what we call inductive biases or priors. So the idea is that if we have 1 million possibilities to act at every point in time, then we very quickly end up with a huge number of possible situations. So you can cast the problem of generating intelligent behavior as the problem of selecting from these billions and billions and billions of options the one that is the best one in a particular situation. And so that's what we call a search problem. And we know that the search spaces that we're dealing with are too large for any computer, even if it includes the entire universe, right? Even if it's the fastest computer in the world and it employs all the matter in the known universe, we know it won't be possible to completely enumerate all of these actions. Yet every human is capable, obviously, of generating intelligent behavior. So it must be possible. It seems like a contradiction, right? It seems like a paradox. The answer is, again, these inductive biases. It's that we don't search through the entire space, but somehow we know which possibilities are plausible and which ones are completely implausible. And most of them are completely implausible, and we don't consider them.
That sounds reasonable, but I assume finding the right designs or biases is not exactly easy.
Unfortunately, it's not. And even though we can get a lot of inspiration from biological intelligence, just copying what animals do has its pitfalls too.
I think we want to be careful not to just engage in what's called biomimicry, mimicking biological systems because we know they're intelligent. What we would want is some sense of what it was about the biological system that is indicative of intelligence and what might just be an artifact of its particular evolutionary history and things like that.
Right. I guess another example would be that while copying the wings of birds for our airplanes was definitely a good idea, it doesn't seem necessary for our planes to have feathers or to flap their wings as birds do. So what are the best ways to approach this?
That is the million-dollar question. But Oliver definitely knows one thing that we should avoid.
We have tried to compartmentalize intelligence into the things that we can easily identify, right? There are eyes, so there's vision. There are hands, so we have grasping and manipulation. There are ears, so there's... But I think this division actually prevents us from understanding what's really going on. And the argument to support that would be that clearly our eyes have not developed independently of everything else, right? The eyes were always embedded into our body. And eyes haven't developed by themselves in nature, right? There's no eyes, there's no animal that's called eyes, right? It's always with the body. It always can do things. It can run away or eat, and So everything, I think, really depends on each other. And if we start dividing things, we prevent ourselves from understanding how things are connected. Our eyes are clearly there not just to perceive the world, but to perceive the world so as we can act in it. And if we remove acting from our attempts to understand how vision works, then we're going to understand some impoverished version of vision. And it might actually, and this is what I suspect, it's actually a much more difficult problem. It becomes easier if we put more things together. And in our research, this has actually been the case, that we actively investigate vision in the context of a robot interacting with the world. And it turns out that we can much more easily come up with things that are robust to the things that humans are robust to, right? We can pick up something, a glass, no matter what shape the glass is. We don't, we drink from a glass without even paying attention to what shape it is exactly. So we have incredible resistance to variability in the world. And I think part of that resistance to variability comes from not having separated all of these components.
If you phrase it like that, why would one just study one aspect of intelligence in the isolation anyways?
There's one anecdote from Oliver that might partially explain this.
There was a project at the Stanford Research Institute at the end of the 60s, which the project probably wasn't called Shaky, but everybody calls it Shaky. Shaky was one of the very early robotic systems. And it was a 3-year project, and people were planning on solving AI within the scope of these 3 years. And they built a robot. And one needs to say, to be fair, that many of the things that we still do today were created in those 3 years. Many of the fundamental algorithms of AI, of robotics and computer vision, were developed by these really smart people in this 3-year project. So that really was an explosion of progress that happened over there in California. But they obviously didn't meet their goal. And that, I think, must have been frustrating to some degree. And I think the response to that frustration was that somebody thought, well, I think the most important challenge, the bottleneck that we encountered is vision. So they went to the robot and they unscrewed the camera, which was a real TV camera at the time. And they went to their office and said, I'm going to become a computer vision guy. And, so they basically took apart this robot, which was one of the early AI projects. And, they had done the right thing from the get-go. They had done everything together, right? And then out of frustration, they kind of broke the robot into its parts. And, that was kind of the Tower of Babel, right? All of a sudden, we have different languages and different disciplines, and things don't interact so well anymore. And now we're struggling to undo that.
Also, coming closer together again is what Lisa recommends.
No one human can have all of the knowledge base that would be required for really making progress on such a question. And so what we really need are teams of people that have expertise in different areas and ways of communicating and collaborating that allow us to use each other's expertise in order to make progress on these problems.
I couldn't agree more. But how do we even know whether the AI that we develop turns out to be actually intelligent? We already said that testing how well machines do at board games is not really cutting it, and giving them IQ tests as for humans is probably also not the best idea.
The most famous approach, the Turing test from about 70 years ago, is based on language. Most of the AI researchers today do not think this is sufficient anymore.
Language on its own, and this is, I think, part of a lot of the criticisms of certain one-off tests for intelligence, like the famous Turing test, according to which if you had an AI system that could fool you into believing that it's a human, then it would count as intelligent. These kinds of one-off tests often don't, they can't probe the full competence that underlies genuinely intelligent behavior. And so interaction with language might help, but unless you also have some sort of grounding of that language with things in the environment, like think about teaching a child what things mean, they're not just interacting linguistically, they're also interacting physically in the world. And that's crucial for language development.
So the Turing test doesn't really capture everything that we care about when we speak of intelligence. Oliver has an interesting idea on how to modify and expand it, though.
So the Turing test was actually, I think, just designed to test the difference between machines and humans, and not really to test in general intelligence in general. I haven't thought about this probably over a decade, but I came up with an extension of the Turing test, which I called the physical work Turing test. And the idea is that you have a room and you put something into that room with instructions of what to do. And then an agent enters the room and does whatever they want to do and leave. And then you can come in and you have to judge whether that was an intelligent agent or not. So you can put there, an IKEA shelf with the instructions and say, please assemble the shelf. And then you can come back and you say that, it didn't quite work, but that probably was still an intelligent person that just failed with the IKEA instructions.
If someone broke it apart and threw it in the corner,
exactly, that was
probably a human.
Human, intelligent, and a little bit maybe too emotional. And then if you put somebody there with an appendicitis, and you put a piece of paper there and say, please remove the appendix, and you come back and the agent and the person is dead, well, then you don't know much, right? I mean because that's not something that you would expect even from an intelligent human to be able to do. So I think the idea is that you could restrict the Turing test to performing physical work, and by doing so, you can infer something about the physical capabilities. I'm not sure. So I would claim that is equivalent to intelligence, right? If you can solve all of these problems, then you would be intelligent. But it involves, again, the physical world, embodiment, and so on.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to see that. But right now, we're pretty far away from actually doing this, no?
True. Instead of trying to measure the overall genuine intelligence of a system, we have different data sets where we test how AI systems do for individual and mostly very narrow and specific tasks, so-called benchmarks, and they are far from ideal.
People in AI and robotics are increasingly recognizing that these simple measures of intelligence are not getting at genuine intelligence. So there are all sorts of criticisms of using certain data sets as benchmarks. And to go back to the ethics, a lot of the criticisms about the ways in which these systems are extremely biased. So I'm thinking of choosing a data set and then measuring your AI's performance for that data set. I think people are starting to recognize that these single data set benchmarks way of proceeding often gets us very good at systems that perform well on data sets like that, but might not get the sort of full, say, visual capacity for image classification or something like that.
Indeed, and as we've learned in the recent past, this evaluation is also very much an ethical question.
We should really think critically about what capabilities are indicative of intelligence and to interrogate our assumptions about that. I think that there's a lot of work that feminist and anti-racist scholarship can do to help us in the AI context more critically examine even the question of what intelligence is and how we're thinking about it.
So where does it leave us now?
Actually, both our guests, Lisa Miracchi and Oliver Brock, are surprisingly optimistic.
As I hope came through in our discussion today, I'm actually very optimistic about making advances in AI. And I think that by shifting a few of our theoretical sort of assumptions or frameworks for approaching the problem, we can make a lot of progress.
If we have the right inductive biases, I think we will crack that nut.
That sounds promising. Many thanks, Olga.
My pleasure.
All right, Nico, thanks for this. It was really, really cool. So what are the developments you are most excited about in this field?
Yeah, I guess for me that changed quite a bit in the last few years. When DeepMind's AlphaGo challenged Lee Sedol in 2016, I was super excited about that. I even got myself a Go board.
Yeah, I was also tempted.
Yeah, but in the meantime, I came to a similar conclusion as the one that Oliver mentioned. Beating humans at some artificial task is not necessarily a good benchmark for intelligence. Now I appreciate it much more if AI system can do things that come more naturally to us. For example, my main interest right now is how humans move their eyes to explore their environment around them, and how similar explorations can be useful for computer vision and robotics. But how about you?
Well, as a philosopher of artificial intelligence, I'm very interested in what the principles that underlie biological and artificial intelligence are. So what these forms of intelligence have in common, and perhaps what the differences are. In other words, what kinds of abilities and mechanisms are needed in order to create something intelligent? Are there different ways of building something that is intelligent? These questions are also very closely connected to the different perspectives about intelligence that different approaches to AI have taken in the past and still do today.
So what do you think about the approaches and tools that we currently have? Do you think we can achieve genuine intelligence with artificial neural networks?
Well, my hunch is that neural networks alone are not enough. Fortunately, we have more tools than that. We can, for example, try to combine neural networks with some insights from symbolic approaches, say, to help, for example, capture a sort of starter kit of concepts that humans seem to have from the beginning. For instance, understanding that objects have boundaries, that objects cause each other to move when they touch, that objects fall if they are not properly supported, and so on. This sort of common sense about how the world works is very important if you want to build AI systems that do the kinds of things you were talking about earlier, the things that come naturally to us. I also think that building robots, so artificial intelligence systems that have a body, is a good strategy to make progress. After all, this common sense that we have depends on how the real world is, and it's tweaked by the ways we interact with the world, how our experience then shapes our intelligence.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But do you think that it is enough to create AI that actually meaningfully interacts with the real world, as Oliver says, or that actually has their own goals, as Lisa described?
I think that it is perhaps the most promising way to go. Bringing together the flexibility and power of neural networks, the organization and stability of symbols, and the interaction between bodies and the world all together. However, how to do that in detail, and whether it is doable at all, is an open question. There are some people in AI, like Josh Tenenbaum, for example, and several others, who have been trying to make some progress on something along these lines. Maybe it will work out, maybe it won't, and we'll have to find another path to follow. So in short, there is lots of work yet to be done.
Right, but I guess regardless of whether we will reach actual human-level AI soon or ever actually, AI is already here with us to stay. Neural networks and even some good old-fashioned AI systems play a large role in our everyday lives and in how societies work, for making our cars safer, to suggesting the next song in our playlist or the news that we consume. So in a very important sense, AI is already a success, even though it does pose some important ethical and societal questions that we will have to think about more carefully in the future.
Yeah, as we have seen in AI and also in human and non-human intelligence research, there are different views, there are different pictures of what intelligence is and how it works. This, of course, makes it even more difficult to really understand whether our AI systems are intelligent in a strong sense, like we are. In the rest of the season, we will take a look at all the forms of intelligence, from the collective intelligence of ants, bees, and fish, to the potential intelligence of plants, and who knows, even cells. We will also ask, why did nature lead to intelligence at all? Why did intelligence, in its many forms, end up evolving? And perhaps we can mimic evolution to create artificial intelligence ourselves.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to that. But I guess for today, I would say that's all.
We'll be back soon with more fascinating, surprising, and controversial conversations about all things intelligent here at the Punching Cards podcast.
And before we close for today, some artificial intelligence trivia. Did you know that Alan Turing, the inventor of the famous Turing test, took telepathy very seriously and even worried that people with telepathic powers would be able to cheat on the Turing test? Here's the original quote. I assume that the reader is familiar with the idea of extrasensory perception and the meaning of the 4 items of it: telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and psychokinesis. These disturbing phenomena seem to deny all of our usual scientific idea, how we should like to discredit them. Unfortunately, the statistical evidence, at least for telepathy, is overwhelming. It is very difficult to rearrange one's ideas so as to fit these new facts in. Once one has accepted them, it does not seem like a very big step to believe in ghosts and boogies. The idea that our bodies move simply according to the known laws of physics, together with some others, not yet discovered but somewhat similar, would be one of the first to go. And with that, see you next time at Punching Cards, the podcast about all things intelligent. Punching Cards, the podcast about all things intelligent, is a production of the Science of Intelligence Cluster in Berlin, part of the Excellence Initiative of the German Research Foundation. The podcast is produced, scripted, and coordinated by Aravind Battaje, Dimitri Coelho Mollo, Benjamin Lang, Nicolas Roth, Olga Shurygina, and Solveig Steinhardt. Editing by Valeria Beccattini. The music was composed and performed by Solveig Steinhardt and Dimitri Coelho Mollo, and mixed and produced by Aravind Battaje. You can find and follow our podcast on Spotify and Apple Music and all your favorite podcast platforms. For show notes, links to additional material, more information, and to contact us, visit www.scienceofintelligence.de/punchingcards or follow Science of Intelligence on Twitter.